Hi, everyone, and I hope you've been having a great week. So, today we're going to talk about selection tools. And so, the various selection tools are a very core part of Photoshop and will be incredibly useful for you to master, whether you're an illustrator, a photographer, a designer, or anything in between or outside that. A selection is a way to isolate part of an image so your edits will only affect that area. Selections allow you to change the appearance of part of an image by applying a filter or other effect to the selection. They allow you to adjust part of a photograph by making a correction to the lighting or color of a selected area. They allow you to replace a background by selecting and deleting the initial background and adding a different background instead. Or they allow you to manipulate part of an image, such as copying or moving selected content. Almost every meaningful edit you make in Photoshop starts with defining what you want to change. Skilled use of selection tools is essential for effective, non destructive editing. So for this assignment, we're going to be starting by downloading the picture of food photography of ramen noodle by Kwang Nyan Vin. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Uh, but with that image now open in Photoshop, let's look at our different selection tools. So first we have our shape-based selection, where we have our rectangular marquee tool and our elliptical marquee tool. These allow us to create squares or circles or rectangles and ellipses by clicking and dragging. And so these can be really useful for like geometric effects, or if you're selecting something that is perfectly circle or perfectly square. These can be a really great way to get that sort of like very quick selection. Uh, you can access the shape-based selection tools by pressing M. You can, to create a perfect square or perfect circle, you can hold Shift as you are clicking and dragging with the selection tool, or you can use Option plus Shift or Alt plus Shift on Windows to create a perfect circle or perfect rectangle from the center of where you drag. Definitely recommend you to experiment a little bit with that to get familiar with how that feels. Both these can be really useful for different effects and have a lot of different use cases in Photoshop that I'm sure you will come across uh, throughout your course and career. So next up, we have the lasso selection tools. These are under keyboard shortcut L. And lasso allows freehand selection. Basically, you click and drag and you create any sort of shape that you want. This is kind of similar to last week when we were looking at like the patch tool or the remove tool, where you could create a selection and then use that to create some sort of image adjustment. The lasso tool works just like that and is the precursor to such tools. And so uh, there are different lasso tools. So there's the standard lasso tool that allows you to drag in any sort of shape. Then there's the polygonal selection tool, which allows you to click and create different points in a selection. So it is more of a geometric style selection, but it can be really good if you aren't very confident with clicking and dragging with your mouse, or if you have something that has these very sharp geometric lines. And then we have the magnetic lasso tool, which combines the normal lasso tool, the polygonal selection tool, and a little bit of the magic wand tool. And it does this to automatically sense edges. And as you click and drag, it kind of snaps your selection to the edge of these objects. However, despite this, it's often better to use the quick selection tool or the object selection tool below, because these newer tools have improved edge detection compared to the magnetic lasso tool. Next up, we have the smart selection tools, and these are going to be your most common ones that you'll probably use in a lot of stuff. They are smart, they are efficient, and they give you a lot of options. And so, first off, we have the quick selection tool, which you can access with the keyboard shortcut of W. The quick selection tool starts out as a brush, and as you kind of like brush over an area, uh, Photoshop tries to sense basically the shape that you're kind of like trying to select, as well as like what is trying to figure out what you're trying to select. And so if you put it over a bunch of like sky, it'll try to select all the sky. If you put it over someone's face, it'll try to select all of the face. It'll basically be looking for different shapes and lines and values and trying to guess what you're selecting based on that. An older version of the quick selection tool is called the magic wand tool. This one basically is you click in an area and it tries to select all pixels that are of a similar color and value to the one you clicked on. And in its options, you can kind of select how much fuzziness there is, which is basically how like lighter or darker than the selected one you can get that it'll continue selecting. Now this one doesn't have any like smart edge detection or object detection, and so it's really not that useful nowadays, but it still is kind of like the basis for a lot of the newer tools. So it's good to kind of be familiar with it. And then lastly, we have the object selection tool, which is the newest selection tool in Photoshop's arsenal, at least as of 2026. And this one basically just allows you to, as you move your mouse cursor over different objects in a scene, Photoshop will detect these objects and then highlight them in usually a bright pink by default, but you can select what color and it'll kind of show you what objects it sees. And this allows you to basically just click and it'll do a smart selection of that object. And the edge detection is better than any of the other tools on this list, but then it's just limited to the objects that it's selecting. And so if you want like a geometric selection, like if you want like this color, like pop background or something of like a square behind someone, then you might have to do some more finagling with, the rectangular marquee tool. But it's still, object selection is easily the most, I won't say the most useful tool, but it's definitely the most advanced tool. And so now that we are kind of familiar with like all of the basic selection tools, now how do we kind of finesse them? And so we can do this by adding, subtracting, and intersecting selections. So you can add selections to one another or add to a selection by holding shift when you use a selection tool. So for example, if you use the lasso tool to create a selection, then if you hold shift and do another lasso, that'll conjoin your two lassos into one selection. You can do this with any of these tools and they'll create the same selection. So this will be great if you want to like select, if you were doing a picture of me and you use the object selection tool to select my head here, but then you wanted to have like a little rectangle behind me for some graphical element, you could then press shift and then use the rectangular marquee tool to create that sort of rectangular shape. And that would all create one selection. Conversely, you can use Option on Mac or Alt on Windows to subtract from your selection. And so if you wanted to do the same thing that I just spoke about, where you select like my face and then create then you held Option or Alt and you made the rectangle, then that would cut that rectangle out of your selection. So you might have like just an unselected box over my face. But this can be useful in different ways, just depending on like how you play with it. And then something that I actually learned when I was researching for this assignment is there's actually an intersect selection, which is if you hold down Shift and Option or Shift and Alt on Windows, then that creates an intersection of your selection, which means that basically it takes the Venn diagram of your two selections that you're doing, and it only selects the middle part. So if you have like a circle here and a circle here, and you hold down Shift and Option or Shift and Alt, then you only get the little sliver where they overlap in the middle. And that can be really useful for different things. So that's really exciting. I'm really glad that they had that because previously I had to do some like kind of layer finagling to do similar effects. So that's a really cool thing that I learned while researching for this project. And then there's also different ways to modify selections. You can view like all of the different ways to modify selections under the select portion of the top menu bar. These allow you to manage and modify your selections. I encourage you to explore like all of the options if you have time, but the key ones that I tend to use are the invert selection, which has the default keyboard shortcut of Shift plus Command plus I on Mac or Shift plus Control plus I on Windows. This inverts your selection. So if you have selected this circle in your default, then it's now selecting everything except that circle. And so that can be really useful. Like I've used it a lot if I've been like coloring line art for a client who sent me some line art that they wanted me to color for them for an illustration or something. I can then select the outside of the line art and then invert it. And then now I have a selection of just the inside of the line art, which can be really useful for coloring like inside the lines. And to that effect, there's also the various modify commands. So we have modify expand, which then makes your selection larger by the pixel amount you input. There's modify contract, which makes your selection smaller by the pixel amount you input. And then there's modify feather, which feathers or softens the selection, kind of like when you use a softer brush. And all of these can be useful in different ways. And so one of the really useful things you can do with the selection is make it into a mask. This adds a sort of screen over your layer where anything painted white on the mask goes through and anything painted black is hidden. And anything painted in various shades of gray on that masking layer kind of goes like has a lower opacity. We'll probably be going over masks in greater detail in a future lesson, but it's definitely good to be familiar with them right now. And so you can often see the mask tool either in the contextual taskbar when you're in the one of the selection tools. It's the one that looks kind of like a rectangle with a circle in the middle of it. And you'll also see this at the bottom of the layers panel. When you've made a selection, all you have to do is click the mask tool in either the contextual taskbar or the layers panel, and that will hide anything that is not selected. Uh, and like I said before, this isn't anything close to what all there is about masks, but this is a nice basic way to get familiar with them right now and will serve you really well for the projects to come. So that's all that we have to cover for today's lesson. So let's get into the assignment that I want you to submit. So I want you to create a selection of your choice in our example photo, the one of the ramen. Actually, I think it's pho, but it's labeled as ramen on Pexels. But create a selection of this soup and then use the mask tool in the layers panel or contextual taskbar to hide the rest of the photo. You might want to use the elliptical marquee tool to select the bowl, or maybe you'll use the object selection tool to select the chopsticks. Maybe you'll select something that it doesn't like confine itself to any object and is just a selection. When you've done that, you've made your selection and made it into a mask, so only your selection is visible. I want you to save your PSD as your first name, last name, and then selections assignment, and put it into your AVC 177 Google Drive folder and your assignments folder inside there. And then once you've done that, put in a link to that PSD or to your assignments folder into the submission box, and you'll be good to go. I hope you all have a great time. And again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to message me on Canvas and I'll do my best to help you. I hope you have a great time and I'll see you next time.